My name is Deepesh Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global. Here we are on Trade Finance Talks TV, and we're talking about standardization of trade and trade finance. Now, when it comes to digitalization, the ICC is really key and an important convener in standards and various elements of digitalization. So today we're joined by Oswald Kuyler, Managing Director at ICC DSI. Oswald, joining us from Singapore. Welcome to Trade Finance Talks TV.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
No worries at all. So I'm going to start with the classic elevator pitch. So in 30 seconds or less, who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
So I'm Oswald. I'm the MD of the DSI initiative. I'm based out of Singapore, and I'm a hybrid. I'm both someone who has a commercial acumen background and also a technologist. And so what I do and what I'm focused on is helping us all get to a state where the digitalization of trade is no longer a myth, something that we're all pursuing, but it's actually happening at scale globally.
Thanks very much, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, it's been 5 months or so since you started now. Gosh, time flies. What are the aims and objectives of the ICC DSI? Am I right in saying that stands for the Digital Standards Initiative? And where will it fit within the wider remit of the ICC?
So if we think a bit about the ICC and our mission, our core mission is to help make businesses work for everyone everywhere. That's really what we're doing. And when you think a bit about John Denton, our Secretary General, he's been talking about this whole journey of going from analog to digital for quite some time. I think over the last year, I've seen him talk to you about that twice. And so when you think about ICC, when we think about helping businesses and moving from analog to digital, standards become key. And it's something that we've seen even last year in the midst of a pandemic. Everyone's trying to digitize, everyone's trying to have more resilient supply chains. People are trying to find new business models around how to finance MSMEs during this difficult time. And what they all have in common is that we don't necessarily have a common way of looking at some of the same elements in trade, whether it's legal entity identification, electronic bills of lading, or even just the way in which we communicate with each other. So this is critical. It's key. It's a key area that ICC is orientated and focused on solving for. And so, so it's been about 5 months. In that 5 months, we spent a lot of time really listening to the various industries, getting a sense of what's really happening. How is the digitization journey truly going? And how can we uniquely use ICC's capabilities to help and solve for it? And so when I think a bit about our positioning, a lot of people ask me, well, is ICC now going to compete with ISO as an example? What is DSI going to do? Well, basically what we're doing is we're using our strength of being across industry, looking at what is out there. So where are there standards that we can actually elevate and uplift and get people to adopt across different industry borders, and where there are gaps, so where someone hasn't necessarily stepped into the fray to fill the standard gap, find the appropriate capabilities and try and accelerate the creation of those standards and the adoption. So that's it on a macro level, really, is helping people get to digital quicker, and doing so that we can build back more resilient and actually get to that point that we all are aiming for, where trade digitization actually leads to an actual impact on the trade finance gap. So quite exciting, but quite a lot of work.
Yeah, and I guess a huge responsibility, big shoes for you there. I guess just taking a step back and looking more at the business model. So who funds the ICC DSI?
Our funding is really from 3 different organizations. So firstly, the ICC itself, which is really important to ensure that we stay neutral and that we can truly leverage the positioning there. The second one is the Asia Development Bank. Our friend Steve Beck is on my board, and we work very closely with Steve to ensure that we're really making sure that we can uplift as many companies as we can globally through this digitization journey. And then finally, the Singapore government is also a part of the funding, and they're also part of our board membership. So that's really fundamentally where our funding comes from. So we're not necessarily selling memberships or standards or anything. We're purely focused on how do we solve that problem, regardless as to what the commercial model might end up looking like in the future.
I mean, very Asia-centric. My question on that funding is, can the EBRD get involved, for example, as you know, a key constituent when it comes to development banks?
I absolutely love that question. So our aim in the long term is to actually go cross-regional. And there's multiple different multilateral banks out there that one could definitely partner with throughout the journey. What we have done though, so if we transition away from the funding side and we have a look at the various different partners and people that we're working with, I'll give you 3 examples. So firstly, one of our friends, Emmanuel Garnett from the World Trade Organization, has now also joined our board. So very excited to have her on board, a wealth of knowledge, and is really going to help us tackle some of the bigger challenges that we're facing. The second example that I'll use is the work that we're doing with UNCITRAL, specifically to push across region the adoption of the MLETR model law. And again, UNCITRAL, not really Asia orientated, but global in nature, very similar to the World Trade Organization. And I think the third example that I'll use is DCSA. So recently, the Digital Container Shipping Alliance, based out of Europe, has produced a fantastic set of work around an EBRD standard for container shipments. And you'll see, for example, in that space, the ICC, through the DSI, really taking that work, elevating it, and actually seeing how we can get and mobilize businesses to adopt those standards. So on the one side, we have the funding, and we need to ensure that we do expand that potentially over time to mitigate that risk. But on the other side, if you have a look at the actual work we're doing and the type of standards we're pushing for, you'll get a truly global sense of all the partners that we're engaging.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, some really big wins on the DCSA front, and also even closer to home for you with Singapore adopting UNCITRAL MLETR just very recently in the past couple of or so. Let's talk more about recent wins and I guess ICC DSI, and talking more about the conversations, the cross-industry conversations that you've been having recently. Can you report or can you disclose any wins that you guys have had so far?
Well, my definition of wins is basically, if I have a look at the time frame it would take us to get to that digitization state, anything that shortens that, I really celebrate. And so some of them is as simple as us, for example, being able to engage over 100 different companies globally in different industries and getting to a very quick realization that for us to solve trade digitization, it's not one problem, but it's actually 5 different unique problems that require different capabilities to solve for. And I'll touch on that maybe a little bit later. The second thing that I would highlight is the ability for us, when we actually started looking at, well, what standards are required, to find quite a large amount of standards out there that's already been defined, but just aren't being used, either because developers don't know they exist or executives don't know they exist. And this to me is a huge win, because it means that we don't have to spend 12 to 18 months in generating new standards. We can immediately go into the advocacy push and ensure that people know that they are there. And I'll use an example, Glyph. Glyph is a fantastic example of a legal entity identification standard that people can adopt, and they can adopt right now. And the impact of that is that as we start looking at different systems integrating with each other and executing processes, we can with certainty, hand on heart, say that the legal entity that we're referring to in the same process is the same. It's no longer something that's uniquely defined within the different systems out there. And so there's about 6 or 7 of those that you'll see next month will be launching our online platform where we'll be able to show people, here's the trade process, this is the different information types that's associated with trade, and here's some standards that you can already adopt today that's going to help create efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to it. It will make it cheaper to integrate, and it's going to start reducing a lot of the risks associated with integration. And I think the final thing that I think is worth highlighting as a part of the wins is just the wealth of capability and ideas that we've seen just in the last 3 months alone. So I'll give you an example. One of the key things that we're focusing on is how do we enable interoperability from a private law perspective between these platforms? So if I'm an MSME today, and I have, let's say, 2,000 customers and they're on 5 different platforms, I have to actually go and sign the terms and conditions and the rule books for all 5 platforms. And I have to actually go and pay for the fees to leverage those. So one of the biggest challenges we've had is how do you actually harmonize that? How do we get to a world where someone can select the platform of their choice that will help them execute trade based on how they want to do it, and have that integration into the broader ecosystem? And so to me, a big win has been seeing the shipping industry coming forward with a bunch of ideas on how we can solve for that. Seeing the mining industry coming forward with a bunch of ideas on how we can solve for that. Seeing the banks coming forward with ideas. And even though these are still ideas, again, that helps accelerate. It takes us from a conversation where this is impossible to a conversation of, well, yes, 6 ideas, where are we going to invest our time and energy in? So that really excites me. I can probably mention more, but
we'll keep
an hour video.
No worries. We'll keep going. I guess you're in a great position because you can really see a holistic view of the entire industry, the shipping and freight sector, as you said, the traders, the financiers, etc., etc. Where really are the biggest challenges that you've seen from your perspective, and that's actually perhaps looking at your previous role as well, and what can the ICC really do here to accelerate and really focus on those key pain points?
So I'll tell you what I think is the least challenging for me. That the areas that don't keep me up at night is the technology portion. How do we technically integrate solutions? This to me is a space that is easily solvable, and I haven't actually met anyone from any of the platforms who've actually raised their hands and said this is a big issue. I think, and very similarly, when we think about the standards, whether it's on the different types of information, like the identity of companies, the identity of goods, processes, those standards are needed, but they're needed for efficiency of integration. So that it removes all the translation services that we would need. The biggest challenge that we have, and I think this is something that, in my view, at least based on the conversations I've had, is a rather universal view, is again coming back to how do we solve liability and how do we solve the legal side of things? And this is where we kind of need 2 solutions. We need something in the shorter term that's going to help us and create platforms, whether that's a fintech platform or if it's a retailer investing in their own hyperledger solution, for example, being able to leverage a set of terms and rules and connect into the broader ecosystem in a way that their million customers can fundamentally use the solution. So if I think about it in a commercial context, you have your sales operations to your customers and you have your procurement operations to your suppliers. And fundamentally, the question is, how do you digitize both ends? How do I ensure that I can leverage a trade solution and I don't necessarily need to, if I have 16,000 suppliers or 70,000 suppliers, sign up to 200 different systems just to get documentation flowing? And it's the same on the other side. Now, interoperability is key, but the legal side is that's the big part that keeps me up at night. And that's the big challenge. Once we unlock that, and once we enable both small and big companies to sign up to their platform of choice and have that information exchange happen between the platforms, my view is we would immediately see The utilization go up, but also we'll see us transitioning the conversation from just how do I digitize a document to all of the brand new use cases that we're all pursuing. We'll see new business models and innovation, people being able to offer financing into their supply chain side in new and exciting ways. We already see it today, but that will become the norm. And that's what excites me quite a bit. So that to me is the key challenge. Now, MLETR, the UNCITRAL Model Law for Electronic Transferable Records, that's the mid to long-term game. And that is an area where ICC is going to mobilize the business community globally so that we can actually empower them with playbooks to actually have a conversation with local governments to say, okay, we need to transition into a world where electronic documentation has functional equivalence to physical documentation, and the way in which we define that in the various different countries aren't so different that if the two of us have a definition of what is control of an electronic document, if my definition and your definition is completely different, how do we legally enforce that? And this is where the UNCITRAL model of electronic transferable records become instrumental. So those are the two key areas. Those are the two things that keep me up at night. How do we solve the private law side in the short term? And then how do we mobilize business in the midterm so that we can see some additional countries adopt MLETR, or like Luca from UNCITRAL would call it, Melita.
Melita, love that. Perhaps it should be called the LSI then, not the DSI. Two very, very clear, tangible goals and focuses there. So, and I think that's really critical. And I guess just moving forwards from that, how can other organizations, private businesses, the trade finance community who want to work with the ICC DSI, I guess with this common goal in mind, how can they get involved? What can they do?
So what they'll see us launching next month, which is quite important, is an actual online portal where they'll both see these are the 5 key areas that we're working on: unifying standards, championing legislative reform, solving the private law contract challenge, solving and harmonizing trade standards, and then solving and harmonizing the technology standards. And they'll be able to go to this platform and both get all of the information that we are busy working through and actually have access. So if I'm a developer, I'll be able to go there and find the standards I need. If I'm an executive, I'll be able to go and see who's busy working on which standards and where do I want to go and allocate my capacity. And if I'm an importer or exporter and I want to contribute to the DSI, I'll be able to actually go and submit myself into that platform and we can bring people in. This will only work if we go broad and wide and we get as many people involved as possible. A single industry can solve it. And it will also not happen if we only have 20, 30 or 40 companies per industry contributing to this. So it's a short answer to say, give us a month and we'll have a big launch. And we are excited and hopeful that we'll see a lot of people coming into the fray and contributing.
Oswald, I'll hold you accountable to that then. March. Oswald, that's all we've got time for today, but thank you very much for joining us on Trade Finance Talks TV. And I think let's definitely do a follow-up in the next month and also, the next 6 months or so, because I think that's a really important piece for the different the different components and the different organizations involved within the wider trade community. Thank you very much, and we'll speak soon.